Small little disclaimer before I begin this review, this story is going to contain some small spoilers from issue 0. So if you are invested in this story and want to read it for yourself, hit the link in the description down below and experience the drifting edge for yourself, and then you can come back. Now, to the video. Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is Manga Rider, and today's video is going to be a sequel to a video I made just over a year ago, that being another chapter of a comic called The Drifting Edge, written by the black sheep of the Sonic community, Dillin Thomas. His first issue was met with some mixed results. Lots of people loved the artwork and enjoyed the plot, while the main critique was the issues relating to characterization, so he did have some rooms to improve. But as opposed to seeing the critiques and just calling the people who had issues with the comic haters, Dillin said that he took the criticism to heart and used it when writing the first true chapter of the story, which is what I'll be reviewing today. But first, a quick retrospective. Because of the length of time I have gone without reading the story, I had to refresh my memory on what I thought, and after reading through chapter 0, which I now know was somewhat of a pilot episode, I'm glad to say that my thoughts have stayed roughly the same. I still enjoy the artwork and the potential of the story, but the issues I had before were still present. If you want more details, then you can click the card. But all in all, issue 0 is still a 6 out of 10 from me, and it still has my interest. Now it's time for chapter 1. Let's take a look. Chapter 1 starts off after the events of issue 0, with Edge, Jay, Flint, and Rex relaxing in their base, having obtained a Phantom Ruby from the last quest. While Edge and Jay think that all went well, Flint is very annoyed that they were never notified of such an item and curses the commander for the lack of information and possibly getting the two kids in danger. After a surprisingly charming back and forth with Rex, their talk gets interrupted by an attack on the base. This is also heard by Edge and Jay, who simultaneously know exactly what the enemy is after. Jay sends Edge to get Flint and Rex, and the two split up, with Jay heading straight to the Ruby. In the midst of battle, along with a not-so-subtle reference to an infamous icon in the community, Edge informs the two about what's going on when suddenly a massive explosion taking out the building Jay went to goes off. The three amigos make their way to the building only to see charred rubble with no Ruby and no Jay. So it's up to the three Macarenos to come up with a plan using gear Edge and Jay made, get the Phantom Ruby back, find out who caused the attack, because it wasn't Eggman, and find out whether or not Jay has truly bit the dust. Chapter 1 has a lot of stuff going for it. Not only has it increased the stakes and the action more than twice as much as the pilot, upon reading it a couple of times, I'm happy to say that Chapter 1 succeeds where Chapter 0 failed in almost all regards. So firstly, let's go with the stuff I liked. My first compliments goes to the artwork. Like the issue that came before it, Chapter 1 has some really good artwork. But what's great to me is that I noticed that it has improved in the areas I criticized last time. The posing has gotten better with the movements showing off each character type, expressions are now big and more distinct, something that only Edge had before, the effects are handled very nicely, backgrounds look simpler but better, and the change to the coloring is something I really appreciate for the fact that I know that Merlot isn't taking too much time with each page. The color scheme now has this much more grungy and desaturated look to it, which I really like. As someone who is drawing a comic, I deeply understand the struggle. Good on you for cutting some corners. My second compliment goes to the storytelling, which is very solid. I can tell that a lot more time was put into how each scene played out. The pacing is far better this time around, with the talking spliced with the action done a lot more naturally. The moments that are meant to hit hard mostly hit their marks, with some exceptions which I'll get to later, and the twists and the reveals of new characters were handled quite well. There's some more quiet moments here which help illustrate what the cast is going up against, and it's done very well. It's much more fun to read this chapter than it was in chapter 0. And 3. The characters, which was my biggest gripe last time. Dillin was really not lying when he said he took the criticism, because this is a big improvement. The characters in this issue, I'm happy to say, are much more refined. Dialogue deliveries and interactions flow much better and sound more natural. Personalities are more unique, with Flint's anger, Rex's cool, Jay's sarcasm, and Edge's general optimism now being much more exemplified than before, and the subtle differences to the way each character talks is very nice to see. I read those speech bubbles and I could practically hear different voices coming out of the characters' mouths. Flint and Edge get easily the most development from this chapter. Edge, who was shown to be a little ball of sunshine before, 4 is now coping with Jace's loss and going through some of the stages of grief, with him distracting himself by showing all the gadgets he made with his former best friend, showing a more uncomfortable side to his character. While Flint, who was last seen as your typical apathetic angry character, is now shown to have a much softer and more understanding side to him, when trying to console and help Edge come to terms with what happened, even allowing Edge to go with them in order to get some closure. I really like that line of dialogue. So Dillin, I'm very impressed. This is much better. You've accomplished quite a lot from the last story, and I can't overstate how thankful I am with you taking some of my criticism. It means a lot, so by all means, keep it up. But like everything, there is still some room for improvement. That being, the way the story is shown. Now what exactly do I mean by this? It's not because of the art itself. I think the art contained in the panels are fine. While some action may still be very stilted, this is chapter 1. I'm not expecting Merlot to go from first time to master over the span of drawing 2 chapters, come on, let's be real here. But the biggest problem I have right now with the art that I didn't see in issue 0 as much was the paneling. This I think hinders some of the more impactful moments in this chapter because the paneling doesn't have a punch. For this simple explanation, the boxes look too similar to each other. Each page is contained with mostly squares and rectangles with only some slight variation later into the story. This doesn't change much when action is then drawn, so because the action scenes are drawn very similarly to the talking scenes, it ends up lessening the punch the fights are supposed to have. But unlike some filthy communists that will not explain his points, I'm going to give you an example of what I mean. This is page 26 from Drifting Edge, and this is a page taken from a fight between Silver and Enerjack drawn by Tracy Yardley. When I put these two side by side, which one is more appealing? The answer is Tracy's work because of the way it's formatted. The action is drawn in a way that makes the panels almost not matter, while also managing to make the action easy to read despite the cluttered nature of the page. Making the panels different shapes and sizes, having a little bit of white space, and not having Enerjack be condensed by his panels, makes this page a lot more fun to read, and you get a scope of the action and how powerful Enerjack is, because the action is not limited to the panels. The Drifting Edge doesn't have that yet. Because of the way the panels are drawn, the fight looks too condensed, making me lose the scope of the fight. But the good news is that, with some creativity and some willingness to experiment, this is not a hard thing to overcome. Let me take this page I criticized and give you my way of giving this action scene more flair. Notice how I changed the panels up a bit and made characters come out of their boxes. I made sure that the panels, rather than limit the amount of action I can show, instead illustrate how big the action is. The bigger the action, the more you want it to pop out from the page. You can call me a hypocrite because I didn't do it myself when I did my Drifting Edge chapter, but I have learned now, so shh. So to condense my critique, my advice would be to get creative with how you draw the panels. Try to stay away from just using squares and get more creative with how you flow each drawing to the next. Page 22 has a good example of what I'm talking about. Do this more, and I promise that the story is not only going to look better, but it's going to flow better. And don't just do this for action scenes, try it with just talking. A simple change in format can make a casual conversation turn into an engaging one. And if you want to find some places to do research, look at the Archie comics, or any fan comics in general. But aside from that big critique, I really enjoyed this chapter. From the characters to the storytelling, it took some of the things I criticized from the last issue and exemplified the story into something really good and containing a lot of great promise. And with the really nice cliffhanger at the very end, I'm going to give chapter 1 of the Drifting Edge a solid 8 out of 10, and I'm looking forward to seeing what Dillin puts out in the near future. My name is Manga Writer, and take this video as a bit of inspiration, because this is how you handle criticism.